It was an early autumn morning, and a pale mist still clung to the ground like breath that refused to fade. The dirt road twisted through abandoned fields, where silent trees stood like sentinels under a silver-gray sky. The wheezing of an old bus echoed through the stillness, a stranger's noise in a place that time seemed to forget. Isabel Moore rested her forehead against the fogged window, eyes tracing the blurred outlines of the world outside. She was quiet, clutching her worn backpack in her lap. A broken zipper, frayed straps, just like her life now. Fragile, patched together, with nothing left to hold on to. Once, Isabel had been a university librarian. She loved books, silence, the quiet moments between pages. But her first love tore all of that away. When she told him she was pregnant, there was no embrace, only the sound of a door slamming shut. Mark, the man she once believed was her safe haven, vanished, leaving her and the child alone in a world that felt colder than ever. This morning, only one email had arrived. Application accepted, full-time live-in caregiver. No salary mentioned, no employer name. It didn't matter. To Isabel, it was a way out. Now, at the end of this winding road, cloaked in mist, a tall wrought iron gate loomed ahead. Isabel tightened her grip on her backpack. She didn't know what waited beyond those gates. All she knew was there was no turning back. The tall iron gate groaned loudly as Isabel pushed it open. A cold gust rushed through, sending her brown hair flying across her face. Ahead, the mansion emerged like a painting lost to time, drawn in shades of gray and silence. Moss clung to the rooftop tiles, and tall stone walls stood watch beneath a brooding sky. Long, narrow windows reflected the gloom above as though mirroring the secrets within. Isabel paused, still as a figure in a Gothic novel. Each stone beneath her feet carried the weight of years, and the air smelled of old wood, wax, and something else she couldn't yet name. It was cold, foreign, but hauntingly beautiful. Before she could knock, the heavy front door creaked open. A woman in her 50s, spine straight as iron, stood in the doorway. Her uniform was pristine, her expression devoid of welcome. "You've arrived," she said simply, no smile, no warmth, then turned sharply, signaling Isabel to follow. The corridor inside stretched endlessly, lined with oil paintings dulled by dust and time. Every one of Isabel's footsteps echoed, as if the house were amplifying her presence, warning her she did not belong. "Your duties are simple," said Mrs. Ellsworth, the housekeeper, in a clipped tone. "Mr. Reed dislikes questions. He dislikes being watched, and above all, he detests pity. You'll prepare meals, administer his medication, and remain silent. If he ignores you, act invisible." Isabel nodded wordlessly. Mrs. Ellsworth stopped before a pair of large wooden doors at the end of the hall. "He's in there, and remember, do not disturb the silence of this house, if you want to stay." The wooden door creaked softly as Mrs. Ellsworth pushed it open. Isabel stepped into a vast room where gray light filtered through tall windows and spilled across the dark wooden floor. A cold fireplace yawned in the center of the far wall, ash and memories lingering in its hollow. A leather armchair faced the window, its occupant unmoving. Jonathan Reed. He didn't turn, didn't greet her. He merely lifted one finger, a silent command. "Leave her," he said, voice hoarse and ragged, as though each word was torn from a throat long unused. Mrs. Ellsworth vanished without another word, leaving Isabel alone. No one spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the ticking of an old clock and Isabel's own breath, quick but restrained. She stood still, spine straight, hands folded in front of her. Finally, Jonathan spoke again, still facing away. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, just a fact he'd seen. Isabel swallowed. "Yes." "How far along?" 3 months, her voice was barely audible. For the first time, Jonathan turned. His face was angular, coldly handsome. A broad forehead, sharp jawline, and a faint scar near his temple. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Steel gray, piercing, and exhausted, as though they'd seen too much of the world. "Is anyone coming for you?" he asked. Silence. She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the floor. He let out a humorless laugh. "Then we're both abandoned." He wheeled himself away with such force the chair squeaked sharply, heading toward the medicine cabinet. Isabel instinctively moved to help, but he raised a hand. "I'm not invalid," he growled. "I just can't walk. Everything else I do myself." She nodded, but deep down, Isabel knew his legs weren't the most broken part of him. It was his heart, his soul. The first days inside the mansion passed slowly, as if time here moved by different rules. Isabel worked in silence, tidying the room, preparing medication and meals, always on schedule. Jonathan spoke rarely, sometimes just a nod or a glance. No thank yous, no kindness. Still, she did her duties, not out of obligation, but because she sensed something, an unspoken pull beneath the freezing quiet. She began noticing the small things, the way he stared out the window for hours without blinking, how his hands trembled slightly when lifting a glass, the distant look he wore when his eyes settled on an old photo on his desk, a blonde woman smiling in a sunlit garden. Then one night, everything shifted. Wind howled against the windows. Isabel was half asleep when a loud thud broke the silence. She jumped up, threw on a light cardigan, and followed the sound. Jonathan's door was ajar. She pushed it gently and found him hunched forward, both hands clutching his left leg. "Damn it, this cursed leg," he hissed through clenched teeth, his forehead slick with sweat. Isabel didn't hesitate. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Phantom pain, right?" she asked gently, taking his hand. He jerked away. "Get out." "No," she said firmly, "I know what it feels like to be alone in the middle of pain. You don't have to go through it alone." Silence. Then he let her stay. She held his hand, breathed in rhythm with him, whispered calmly, "You're not just the wheelchair. You're still a man, and I see that." When the pain finally eased, Jonathan looked at her, and for the first time, something flickered in those steel gray eyes. Something that looked like gratitude. Since that night, the air between them was no longer frozen. Jonathan never said her name, but his gaze had softened. When Isabel entered his room, he didn't turn away. He looked at her, longer now, as if trying to understand something he himself didn't dare to name. She felt it, subtle but undeniable. Not enough to be certain of anything, but enough to stir something inside her, a flicker, a warning, a pull. There was something different in the way he stayed silent. No longer cold, but searching. In the way he glanced at her when he thought she wasn't watching. In how he held the tea she brought, fingers lingering on the porcelain as if warmth from her hands still lived there. That night, the rain poured in thick, steady sheets. The house seemed to breathe with the storm. Isabel couldn't sleep. She wrapped herself in a thin robe and wandered down to the library, looking for anything to quiet her thoughts, anything to pull them away from him. The door to the library was slightly ajar, candlelight flickering through the crack. She stepped in and froze. Jonathan was there, alone, not in his usual leather chair, not the man of stone. His hair was tousled, the top buttons of his white shirt undone. One hand rested loosely on his wheel. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching the fire. He was watching her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice raspy, but not cold. "The rain," she replied softly. "It's dry in here," he said, gaze steady. "But you're shivering." She hugged herself. "I was going to make some tea." "No tea," he said, cutting her off. "Sit here, with me." Isabel hesitated. Her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't employer and employee anymore. This was something else. Fragile. Unspoken. She sat across from him, breath shaky. Jonathan lowered his head, then looked up again, eyes fixed on her as if the whole room vanished around them. "You scare me," he said suddenly. She blinked. "Me? Why?" "Because you don't see me like everyone else. You don't see the chair. You see a man." The words fell between them like a stone in still water. Isabel felt her chest tighten. She had always seen that, not because he was beautiful, but because there was something in his sadness that made her want to stay, to not walk away like everyone else. "Maybe," she whispered, "because I want someone to see me too." Jonathan gave a soft laugh, almost a sigh of pain. "You should be afraid of me, Isabel. I'm dangerous." "I'm not afraid," she answered, her voice barely above a breath. He leaned closer. His breath touched hers, warm and thick like wine. And then his lips were on hers. It wasn't gentle. It was raw, urgent, as if they were betting everything they had left inside them. Her fingers dug into the armrest. His hand cupped the back of her neck, trembling. When they pulled apart, lips still close, breath shared between them, Isabel thought, "I'm falling. And this time, I don't want to stop." That afternoon, the sky was clearer than usual. Isabel was crouched in the garden, picking dried flowers, when she heard the crunch of tires against gravel. A black car had stopped at the front gate. Sleek, polished, utterly out of place amid the old-world charm. She looked up, and her blood turned to ice. Mark. He stepped out, sharp in a tailored suit, that same smug smirk she once mistook for charm. The man who had disappeared without a word now stood before her like a ghost she never wanted to see again. "Isabel," he said smoothly, with a cruel glint in his eye. "Didn't expect to find you here. Still pregnant? Working as staff?" She clenched her fists, choking back every word she wanted to hurl. "Why are you here?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Jonathan Reed. I'm his family's legal counsel." The air turned thick. When Jonathan appeared at the doorway, hands resting on his wheels, his eyes froze the moment he saw Mark. Isabel didn't have time to speak before Jonathan said, his voice cold as steel, "We know each other." Mark smirked. "Seems we have more in common than we thought." The air cracked like lightning. Isabel stood between them, past and present, and realized fate wasn't done with her yet. That evening, she brought dinner to Jonathan's study. He sat in silence, a sealed envelope on the desk. Without looking at her, he said, "It's about the accident, and about Mark. Isabel, the baby is his." She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Jonathan reached out, took her hand and squeezed gently. "It changes everything. But I'm not walking away. Not if you promise no more lies." One night later, just as Isabel was about to turn off her bedroom lamp, Mrs. Ellsworth knocked softly. She said nothing, only handed her a folded note. "Come down the west corridor. Bring nothing J." Isabel followed. Her footsteps echoed along the wooden floor like heartbeats. At the end of the corridor, the library doors were already open. Candlelight spilled over bookshelves, stone walls, and a table set at the center, covered in white cloth and fresh flowers. Jonathan sat there, dressed in a dark suit, every detail in place. Isabel's heart clenched. "I have nothing to offer you," he said, eyes locked on hers. "Just this heart, not perfect, but honest, and a promise." She stepped closer, emotion swelling in her chest. "I, Jonathan Reed, vow to love you, Isabel Moore, even on the darkest days. I promise to be your friend, your child's father, your husband, the best way I know how." His voice trembled, so did his hands. Isabel placed hers over his. "I, Isabel, vow not to love you for what you've lost, but for all that remains. I choose you, not because I need saving, but because I want to walk beside you." No applause, no music, just a kiss, and two broken souls stitching themselves whole, quietly, lovingly. That morning, just as Isabel finished preparing breakfast for Jonathan, the doorbell rang. Before she could react, Mrs. Ellsworth entered and placed an envelope on the table. "From Mark Sullivan," she said. "He didn't come in, just said, 'She'll understand.'" Isabel's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was the official document, Mark's renouncement of parental rights. She stood silent for a long moment, Her heart didn't race like it had when she saw him last. There were no tears, only a strange emptiness and relief. Jonathan watched her from his chair near the window, where morning sunlight spilled in. "Are you all right?" She walked over, handed him the paper. He read it, then set it down. "He's gone," she whispered. "And what about you?" Jonathan asked, voice low. "Are you planning to leave too?" Isabel knelt before him, taking his hands into hers. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," she said. "You are this baby's father, not by blood, but by heart." Jonathan pulled her into his arms. "And you're the first reason I want to believe in tomorrow." Outside the window, the first petals of spring had begun to bloom. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly through the skylight above the mansion's inner courtyard. Isabel placed a teapot on the stone table in their secret garden, hidden behind ivy and filled with birdsong. Jonathan arrived, still in his wheelchair, hair slightly tousled, holding the book she'd once left behind in the library. "I still don't know why you chose this place," he said, half teasing. Isabel poured the tea, smiling. "Because you're here." He squeezed her hand, his gaze quiet but deep. "You pulled me from the edge, Isabel. From a place so dark I stopped believing the sun existed. And now, if I ever lost you, I'd lose the only light I have." She placed her hand on her now visible belly. "Then promise me, stay. Not just for me, but for this child too." Jonathan kissed her hand. "I'm not just staying, Isabel. I'm home." And in that quiet, where no one expected it, a family began to grow. Not by blood, but by choice and by faith. The night Isabel went into labor, it rained. But no one feared the rain in that house anymore. Jonathan sat beside her for hours, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering calm words he wasn't sure he believed himself. He couldn't be inside, but his heart moved with every passing footstep, every flicker of motion from the swinging doors. When the first cry broke through the air, Jonathan closed his eyes, as if the world had paused just to listen. A baby girl, strong and healthy, with jet black hair and cold gray eyes, just like his. Isabel was wheeled out, exhausted but glowing. She reached for his hand and whispered just 3 words. "She's perfect." They named her Ellie, a short name, full of life. Jonathan barely left her side. In those first days, he learned to hold Ellie one-handed, changed diapers with quiet focus, and spent hours memorizing the shape of her fingers, proof that he could still create something whole. The nurses smiled every time they saw him, not just a man in a wheelchair, but a father. 1 year later, on Ellie's first birthday, they held a small ceremony in the garden behind the mansion. Not a promise this time, but a real wedding. Isabel wore white, flowers in her hair. Jonathan waited under a sunlit arch, Ellie resting happily in Mrs. Ellsworth's arms. As they exchanged rings, Ellie babbled, "Dada!" and everyone laughed and cried. After the ceremony, the 3 of them sat together on the porch steps, the morning mist still clinging to the grass. Jonathan wrapped his arm around Isabel, the other resting gently on her belly, where new life quietly bloomed again. "Do you believe," Isabel whispered, "that everyone gets a second chance if they're brave enough to choose it?" Jonathan nodded, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "I don't need anything else," he said. "Just this, us, and the life we've chosen." And there was nothing more to say. Some sunrises don't ask for poetry, just presence, just the ones you love, beside you as the world begins again.